Now, most of us are outraged by what happened to Charlie Hebdo and obviously the massacre in Paris. And some in the right wing are the most outraged, and understandably so, right? But not everybody in the right wing. Some in the right wing understand why they might have been attacked. Interesting. And they are the most religious of us, so-called religious, right? Like Bill Donahue, he's the head of the Catholic League. It's an organization that has approximately 3.5 people, but he gets on television all the time, most of the time on Fox News, and says, I stand for all Catholics. Nonsense. But he's a fundamentalist, and so, interestingly enough, he says, quote, Muslims are right to be angry about the cartoons. Now, that seems weird, right? Normally, these guys speak out against Muslims all the time. Why? Because Charlie Hebdo actually criticizes all of the religions. It's deeply secular, makes fun of the Pope all the time, makes fun of all the different faiths. And so Bill Donahue dislikes them as much as Muslim fundamentalists dislike them. Now, Bill Donahue didn't go kill anybody. Don't get me wrong, neither did Pat Buchanan or any of the guys we're talking about. But they look back and they go, well, I mean, those guys did have it coming. Bill Donahue in the past has talked about like, oh, Muslims get to do this stuff, almost like in a longing kind of way. Pat Robertson, in a different context, says, well, you know, the Muslims do get to beat their wives. That does keep them in line. Right. Now we go to Pat Buchanan. He's asked about it. And let's see what he has to say about it.
And I do believe this. I mean, I've seen some of those cartoons which have not been published, and they are really foul and offensive and understandably outrage the Islamic community and the decent Muslims of France and around the world. And given what's happened since the Ayatollah put the fatwa out on Salman Rushdie, you ought to realize if you're going to insult the Prophet or write foul cartoons about him, you're risking a real problem for yourself. That's just the real world.
First time I've ever seen these guys show any sympathy towards Muslims at all. And why? Because they're offended. Because Pat Buchanan's religion was also offended, and so was Bill Donahue's. And all the fundamentalists are very touchy about their religions. They don't want any cartoons out there. So even in a massacre like this, a huge terrorist attack like this, the most right-wingers in our country are like, well, I can see where the Muslims were coming from on that one. Fascinating. Now, how about Joe Walsh? He's a former congressman who I will be interviewing soon until he sees this video. He put out a tweet saying, let's hope that when the Islamists next strike, they first behead the appeasing cowards at CNN, MSNBC et al. Who refuse to show the cartoons. Now, look, he's coming at it from a little different place than Buchanan and Donahue are. And he's saying, well, you know, they should strike at those places because they didn't show the cartoons, and he thinks the cartoons should be shown. So different context than Buchanan, right? But right-wingers here, fundamentalists here, what do they love? They love violence. He's like, oh, if you're going to behead anyone, MSNBC, CNN, those guys I don't like, go get those guys. And of course, he gets in a little bit of trouble for this. He's now a talk show host, but he doesn't mind the trouble. He does weak, backpedaling, somewhat explanations on Twitter. Islamists don't take orders from me, and they'll inevitably strike again, and cowards continue to empower them. Get fucking serious. Well, okay. He says, then get real. We're supposed to get real and get serious. I don't hope for another act of terror, but I know it will happen, and the appeasing cowards of CNN et al. Only endanger all of us. No, it seemed like you endangered them by calling for their beheadings. So I think you got your facts a little mixed up. Now, don't get me wrong. I hate that CNN and MSNBC and Associated Press and Reuters and all these places are not showing the cartoons. Sky News doesn't show them. One of the cartoonists was on from Charlie Hebdo. She put up the cartoon. They panned to the sky and they cut away to the anchor and said, oh, we're so sorry for showing those cartoons. I don't like that either. But Joe, you don't go around saying that, well, I hope the next beheading is at CNN or MSNBC. It's kind of a bit of a lunatic thing to say, okay? And then when you do, don't put out these non-apologies. And then he says, I'll say it again. Of course, all the right wings always, oh, double down. Islamists have declared war on us, and the appeasing cowards of CNN, MSNBC will get more innocents killed. But they're not calling for anyone to get killed. It looked like you kind of were. Can't you at least say, well, I didn't mean it that way. Of course I don't want the good folks at CNN, MSNBC, who I heartily disagree with, but of course I don't want them beheaded, right? That's ridiculous. I'm just saying that I wish they would show more courage. Why can't they just do a normal apology? No, say it again! Because in some ways, the Buchanans of the world just get just as offended as Islamic fundamentalists. And all the right-wingers in this country, they have one answer to any question asked: violence.